we need to first get a grasp of the origins of Buddhism. Today, Buddhism has two main denominations. There's more than two, but two main denominations. The Mahayana denomination and the Theravada denomination. There is also what some call popular Buddhism. And there is another school known as the Vajrasana school of Buddhism. But Mahayana and Theravada are the two main. My sources for these studies that I am doing are many, because I have read and researched many. But I'm going to use the material of one main person because he's done a good job in organizing the train of thought. So there'll be a lot I have taken from him. And he is Dr. Patrick Zuckerman, co-founder and president, director of Evidence and Answers. Dr. Patrick Zuckerman. You can find him on the internet. But there is also, I'm also using some material and some insight I have gained from an author called Christmas Humphrey. He's written a book called Buddhism and Introduction to Buddhism, and various other sources. I'm also using my personal knowledge, being in and living in the context of Buddhism. So I want to give credit to people whom I have referred to, books I have referred to, and this is a collection from information I have gathered and my personal understanding of things as well. That said, now let's look at the origins. Siddhartha Gautama was born approximately 560 BC in northern India. His father was Shuddhodana. He was the ruler of a district near the Himalayas, which is today the country of Nepal. Shuddhodana sheltered his son from the outside world and confined him to the palace, where he surrounded Gautama with pleasure and wealth. This is all common information that you can find in many books and internet sources. Despite his father's efforts, however, Gautama one day saw the darker side of life on a trip he took outside the palace walls. One could even say that Siddhartha at the time was surprised by what he saw. He saw four things that forever changed his life. He saw an old man, a sick man, a dead man, and an ascetic. That is a person who practices severe self-discipline, abstention, a person like a hermit, a Puritan, a monk, or a yogi. So, a spiritual person. Deeply distressed by the suffering he saw, So when the Buddha saw all of this, he was surprised. He saw it as suffering. He decided to leave the luxury of the palace life. So this propelled him to do something. And he began a quest to find answers to the problem of pain and human suffering. So Siddhartha was confronted with reality of life, and he set out on a quest to find an answer. Gautama left his family and traveled the country seeking wisdom. Apparently, according to sources I have consulted, he studied the Hindu scriptures under Brahmin priests, but became disillusioned with the teachings of Hinduism. He then devoted himself to a life of extreme asceticism in the jungles. So, pulling himself away from people and all that. He soon concluded, however, that asceticism did not lead to peace and self-realization, but merely weakened the mind and the body. Gautama eventually turned to a life of meditation. While deep in meditation under a fig tree known as the Bodhi tree, here in Sri Lanka we call it the Bo tree, meaning tree of wisdom, Gautama experienced the highest degree of consciousness called nirvana. Gautama then became known as Buddha, meaning the enlightened one. He believed he had found the answers to the question of pain and suffering. His message now needed to be proclaimed to the whole world. And so he began his teaching ministry. He gained a quick audience with people of India, since many had become disillusioned with Hinduism. By the time of his death at age 80, Buddhism had become a major force in India. Expansion and development of Buddhism. Buddhism remained mostly in India for 3 centuries until King Asoka, who ruled India from 274 to 232 BC, converted to Buddhism. So there you go. Somebody was converted. Buddhism, the principles of Buddhism was explained, and somebody was converted. So I guess it's okay to share the gospel with a view of seeing somebody being converted, not by force, not by inducements, but because this person has come to believe. So King Asoka got converted. Then this king sent missionaries. Today the word missionary is a bad word, because missionary is equal with imperialists, those who came with guns, they say, and the Bible, the gun in one hand and the Bible in one hand, and who forcefully converted people. So that is sad. But we know, you and I know that true missionaries didn't do that. It's only political, imperialistic people who did that. So Ashoka sent missionaries throughout the world, and Buddhism spread to all Asia. It was he who sent Ananda, his son, on a mission to Sri Lanka. So King Ashoka's son came on a mission to Sri Lanka. Their first convert was the King Tissa from Anuradhapura. Subsequently, his family and others also accepted Buddhism. So with Buddhism coming to Sri Lanka, subsequently Ananda, who brought Buddhism, invited his sister also to come to Sri Lanka, and she went to she brought with her a sapling of the bo tree from where the Buddha attained enlightenment. I believe Buddha Gaya, it's known as, and planted it in Anuradhapura. They came to a place called Mihintale in Sri Lanka, and that's where they established things, and in the city of Anuradhapura. But even before Buddhism expanded to Asia and other parts, according to Patrick, my source, two distinct branches developed, as I said earlier, a conservative and a liberal school of thought. The conservative school is labeled Theravada, and it became the dominant form of Buddhism in Southeast Asia. Thus, it is called Southern Buddhism. Southern Buddhism has remained closer to the original form of Buddhism. This school follows the Pali canon of scripture, which, although written centuries after Gautama's death, contains the most accurate recording of his teaching. The liberal school is Mahayana Buddhism, which traveled to the north into China, Japan, Korea, and Tibet, and is also called Northern Buddhism as it spread north. It adopted and incorporated beliefs and practices from the local religions of the land. The two branches of Buddhism are so different, they appear to be two different religions rather than two branches of the same tree. I guess that's also important to know. Here are a few differences. Theravada Buddhism sees Buddha as a man. Gautama never claimed to be deity, but rather a way shower, somebody who showed the way. Mahayana Buddhism, however, worships Buddha as a manifestation of the divine Buddha essence. Since Gautama, many other manifestations of bodhisattvas have appeared. that is extremely spiritual, those who have attained a special form of equivalent to sainthood have appeared. An example is Tibetan Buddhism, which worships the spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama, as a bodhisattva. Theravada adheres to the Pali Canon and Buddha's earliest teaching. Since Mahayana believes there have been many manifestations, this branch incorporates many other texts written by bodhisattvas, that is, those who have arrived at a special attainment, almost equivalent to the Buddha, as part of their canon. So the Mahayanas, what I'm trying to say is the Mahayana Buddhism has incorporated many other texts written by these highly spiritual Buddhist people. Theravada teaches that each person must attain salvation through their own effort, and this requires one to relinquish earthly desires and live a monastic life, a life separated. Therefore, only those few who have chosen this lifestyle will attain nirvana. Because you have to really separate yourself. There's some things to do. Mahayana teaches that salvation comes through the grace of the bodhisattvas, that is, these highly spiritual Buddhist people. And so many may attain salvation. So it seems like, according to Theravada Buddhism, only a few can actually attain nirvana, but according to Mahayana, anybody can, with the blessing and the grace of these certain Buddhist figures who have attained a very high level of spirituality according to Buddhism. And they are called bodhisattvas. Divine beings do not have a place in Theravada Buddhism. The primary focus is on the individual attaining enlightenment, and a divine being or speculations of such only hinders the process. Therefore, several sects of this branch are atheistic. So even within Theravada Buddhism, there are several sects, and that needs to be understood. Mahayana, on the other hand, has many diverse views of God, since this branch is inclusive and has adopted the beliefs and practices of various religions. Many schools are pantheistic, meaning seeing God in everything in their worldview, while others are animistic, meaning animism is the idea that all things, animals and inanimate, possess a spirit or an essence thereof. So in Mahayana, Buddha is worshipped as a divine being. Some schools pay homage to a particular bodhisattva, a spiritual person sent to their people. Other schools have a mixture of gods whom they worship. For an example, Japanese Buddhism blended with Shintoism and included worship of the Shinto gods with the teaching and worship of the Buddha. So it is important to grasp that there's a lot of schools, a lot of sects sects, and many ways of practicing Buddhism. So, when speaking with a Buddhist, it is important to understand what branch of Buddhism they are talking about. The two main branches are dramatically different. I am coming mainly from a Theravada Buddhist perspective, and so I am leaning a lot towards how can we relate to Theravada Buddhists, because I think the principles will be the same. I live in a context of Theravada Buddhism. So to conclude our first lesson, let me just repeat. We have looked at the origins of Buddhism, but not its basics as yet, not its pillars as yet. We need to understand that Christianity began 500 years later than Buddhism, after Buddhism. So Buddhism was already around 500 years before Christianity. It is evident from what we have looked at so far that Buddhists too have denominations and many sects, just like us Christians. It is important to point out that though the Theravada school of Buddhism reject the idea of God and do not consider the Buddha as God, as a God, the majority Buddhists who adhere to Theravada Buddhism here in Sri Lanka seek the help and favors of many gods. It's an irony, but that's what is happening. Buddhist temples and Buddhist shrines at street corners, you will find them all over the place. Something that actually the Buddha never advocated for. And these Buddhist shrines, these Buddhist houses, so to speak, in the corners of streets, major intersections, some of them house other gods too, maybe in a separate area, but very close, or sometimes in the same enclosure. Buddhist temples too house a place for other gods, various statues and gods. So this opens the door for us Christians as we interact with our Buddhist friends and relatives to talk about God, because they do incorporate, whether you like it or not, the idea of a God, the concept of a God, the worship of a God in their daily lives. It also tells us that they seem to need a God. Even in a lot of places, and especially at the back of certain transport buses or other modes of transport, sometimes you will see stickers at the back saying, the help of the Buddha, the grace of the Buddha, the mercy of the Buddha, and the blessings of God. They wish people the mercy of the Buddha and the blessings of gods. So in reality, the idea of a God or gods is not deleted from the real lives of Buddhists. So we will stop here, and then we will proceed to go on to our second segment of this study, and we'll pick it up from there in a moment.